All right, so I know some of you, because we worked together over the years, but then again, there's a lot of new faces here. For those of you who don't know, I worked in R&D for Sepwa for, I don't know, I think it's 13 years, but I'm not sure, I can't remember. It was a reasonable amount of time. So we're going to sort of walk you through of how I ended up working in sort of precision ag, sort of grain quality, post-farm gate, chemical residues, varietal purity, hence this sort of topic ended up being quite close to me, right through to where I am now, which is running a brewery. So we'll just go to, I guess, that one, yep. As I said, 13 years working with Sepwa, and I guess my work in the brewing industry started off with, we worked on a variety purity project, and about probably, I don't know, 9 or 10 years ago, there was new technology out around variety purity testing, and GRDC was road testing this, and we ended up with a job to basically test its statistical reliability and its reliability overall, as in going into the malting industry, and also looking at what was the variation within stacks and what was going to be the resulting performance. After about 3 months, we went to GRDC and we said, this technology doesn't actually work. What do you want us to do with the remainder of the project funds, because this is going nowhere? And they said, well, that's pretty handy, because we're about to hand out about $1 million to this technology, and you can keep the remaining of your measly $20,000 or whatever and do whatever you like, because you've saved us quite a bit. So from that, I did the Brewing and Malting short course, and that was sort of the start of that sort of post-farm gate in the barley industry process. And as well as that, we're looking at sort of gluten quality. We did a lot of work with Interflower in Southeast Asia. And then we sort of then moved on to looking at unmalted products going to Southeast Asia and also in China. And that was really based around GRDC looking at that. Well, could we get an edge in there for unmalted product to edge out some of the rice in some of those beers? And that enabled me to sort of see into the back end of the brewing industry. And I was really taken by the level of science that was used in there and that feedback mechanism in the processing. And that was really interesting. And I realised there was always something new to learn. So that was something that kept me with Sepwa for so long, was that part of it. But then also the brewing industry sort of opened up in front of me. So after about sort of 3 or 4 different spreadsheet scenarios, none of which worked financially, in about 2015, we decided, yep, we're going to do this. We ordered some equipment and we started construction on a pretty modest sort of about 100 square metres in our backyard where we live in Esperance. And that was going along okay, and sort of in 2017 we were sort of happily brewing a bit of beer. And I'm going to bring this compliance story in because it links actually back to what you were talking about, chemical residues. When we were working with Sepwa, we actually did a lot of work with glyphosate residue, and yeah, I don't know, I don't think there's any media in the room, is there? Yeah, okay, so we were looking at like glyphosate. Right, we'll just reword that. We were looking at glyphosate residues and how they came about, and then metabolites of glyphosate and those sorts of things. So we were very, very wary of compliance and that sort of thing. And this is an interesting story that I sort of went through locally. So we were brewing beer 2017, and our local government came to us and said, oh, you're not just brewing beer, you're selling T-shirts as well. Under local government planning, that's retail. We need you to just come in and fill out another forming for local government planning, and we can get that under your umbrella and it'll be fine. Little did we know that that triggered a whole reassessment of our planning process. And that then involved DWER. And we're in a groundwater zone where we originally started up. And DWER was pretty much prepared to evict us there and then and kick us out. We managed to get a 2-year grace on that. And in 2 years or 24 months, we somehow, I don't know, even looking back, I don't know how we did this. We found another site, we subdivided that, we went through that in to get a whole new land title. We took it from a sandy crap paddock, to which we do pretty well in Esperance, but then again we do pretty well in WA in general. And we turned it into a site with about just under 500 square metres of a brewery venue with kitchen and toilet. And we were up and running. And I've got to say, that wouldn't be without, we had some funding support from the state government as well, but they were in a bit of a funny spot. We had 2 state governments prepared to shut us down, but then other state government departments saying, well, actually, we quite like your business, we quite like this idea. So they were sort of in a predicament, but that was our journey in terms of compliance. And I will say that back, and we knew this as an industry when I worked in the barley industry, if you have your head above the parapet and it's in target, you're in trouble. So these sorts of discussions around residue, while they're relevant, you need to be really onto them in the background, because the last thing you want is being in a corner, and the last thing a trader wants is the cargo that gets turned around. So yeah, that was something that was really working in our local backyard. That's what we ended up with. That's actually changed a little bit now. We have another sort of another 300 or 400 square metre shed to the south of that, and another working kitchen behind that. But yeah, we were very fortunate to end up with that, and it's I pinch myself sometimes. The creative flexibility that I have there in terms of making beer and also doing it in unique ways is a great opportunity, and I'm really grateful of that. And also, I guess I owe that somewhat to you guys, because there's equally important, there's mentors in this room, and also mentors I work with in DPERD or DAFWA then in Esperance, that was really important in sort of my science grounding, and also were just great guides as well. So thank you for that. Now, our beers are actually made a little bit different, and here's where Hugh's going to take the piss out of me, and that's where the malting guys might get a little bit upset with us as well. We use a lot of product direct from farm. So right now we use a lot of barley, obviously. We also use a fair bit of wheat, and also we started using rye. Now, barley is coming out of that where I worked on the raw malt, or raw grain brewing into Southeast Asia, so I developed sort of a lot of understanding in that. And that was a no-brainer for me, because we sit in the middle of 500,000 tonnes of barley and it all just goes straight on the boat. So it's like, to actually use something that then you can hold in the hand is quite rare for broadacre farming. So I really wanted to do that, and that was something that really underpins our business, and it'll always be there. We use farm direct grain, and we have that connection with our local growing community. And even our traditional styles of beer, which are highly malt-based, will always have some unmalted material in them, because that means that it actually comes from Esperance, and that sort of pegs it to the ground in terms of identity for us. The one exception to that is our gluten-free product. Obviously, you know, in the grains industry, particularly wheat and barley, you're pretty much prone to have gluten, is our honey seltzer, and that's where we use Esperance honey and we use Kununurra corn. And that's the only thing we don't use local barley for, or local wheat for. And that's sort of opened up a lot of interesting collaborations. One of the beers you're going to taste this afternoon is this Beaches de Boab one. It's been a really cool partnership through sort of a few various things. We got to know Kaylin Desert from the Hoochery in Kununurra. Have any of you guys been to Kununurra, been there? Had a taste of the whiskey? I don't know how they do it. You're tasting whiskey, it's 35, 40 degrees, and it's 10 in the morning, and it's just like, yep. So Kaylin and I are having this discussion around, man, you've got to get a beer. And she goes, well, look, Nigel, I don't want to make beer. If I give you grain, can you make something that's growing here? And I'm like, yeah, we can. So she sent us sorghum and corn. Sorghum I really didn't bond well with. The tannins in the actual outside of the grain were not fun, and it didn't give us a very good flavour profile. They use it a lot in South Africa. I'm not sure how they do that, so I'd be curious to know that more, or they just have pretty tough tasting beer. But this beer here you're going to taste later on. So this here is Order River corn and Esperance barley, and hence it's called Beaches de Boab. We have the beeches, they have the Boab trees. And that's something, it's a mid-strength, so it's designed to be drank in that 35, 40 degrees. And if you just had a whiskey tasting paddle, then I can recommend it for sure up there. What this has opened up for us is a whole heap of sort of contract brews. I think we have a couple in tank right now for different various organisations. It started off with a family group coming to us as a commemorative brew, and then it grew from there to other community groups coming us, and they bring us, you know, a couple hundred kilos or 150 kilos of their barley. And I think Unigate's coming with us next week, and it's going to be actually a community brew. So you've got like 20, 30 kilos from all these different growers. I'm not looking forward to the lack of consistency of that, but it will be uniquely theirs, and that's something that sort of, you know, really binds them in and gets a buy-in for those guys. So that's something for the Newgate 100 years. I think we have with Hyden 100 years will go on in a couple of weeks as well, and we've done various ones of those. So that's been a lot of fun too. COVID. Now, essentially we're pretty much in a hospitality industry. I never actually wanted to be in a hospitality industry, but what I found in the beginning was, being a small brewery, nobody wants to buy your beer. One, because all the taps you see are contracted. This stadium is contracted to Gage Roads, and they fought like hell for that. And it's been a really good thing for them, because while they don't necessarily make a lot of money out of this, what comes into this stadium, the people that come through here drink their product and go away and become familiar with their product. So we were sort of faced with how do we get something like that? So building your own venue is what we did for that. But then when you hit COVID and all the venues are shut, we were in a lot of trouble. We'd been open at that new venue for 3 months. We're at peak debt with a bank. We owed a builder more than 150K. We owed electricians 50K or so, and we were just like, holy shit. And I think for the first day I was stressed, and then I realised they're the people that should be stressed because there's literally nothing I can do, and we're in a lot of trouble. I think it comes from farming. Like the first million you're worried, and then after that, if a few million you loan after that, the bank should be worried. So, and we realised we needed to package beer, so we started to go across this bridge to nowhere of packaging. And we're sort of probably 3/4 of the way across that now. And then once you start packaging beer, that unravels a whole heap of aspects around quality control, freight in and out, labels, all those sorts of things. That said, once we did get open, COVID was pretty good for that. The fact you couldn't go to Bali, you couldn't go to Melbourne, you couldn't go to the Gold Coast, nobody could go to Southeast Asia. As the Skadden farmers, they couldn't go to Europe during... but that was good for us. And particularly that first winter, we had all these sort of 20-something people that were normally at uni and they were at home, and they're good clients. So we've since noticed that the honeymoon now is probably over, as particularly for families and stuff that have got relatives that are in the eastern states, they're all off travelling now, and that comes with its own hiccups at the moment. But yeah, our winter's now 20 or 30% down on last year. So that's what we sort of got out of COVID. It forced us into packaging. Now we're in it, we'll stay in it. This is also another beer you'll taste at the end today, Lockdown Lager. And this was all a bit of a piss take about Esperance locking the road between Kalgoorlie, because Kalgoorlie had infections but Esperance didn't, and it was, yeah, just those crazy times. I guess it's once in a lifetime we get to experience something like that. I guess, like I said, we brew a lot with unmalted material. Now Hugh, when he comes in here, will probably he can probably take the mickey out of us of this. Last year we were actually champion small medium brewery, so I think we're going okay. It's a pretty uncommon thing to use this in the brewing industry, and something, you know, the last discussion you've had is very much around that macro scale and around sort of those decisions at the big end of your industry. We are very much at the nano scale in the industry, and this unmalted material, it's something we sort of put a peg in the ground and we sort of work around, but it's not very common in the brewing industry. It's working for us. That said, there'll always be some malt in our brews. Particularly those specialty malts, they give us flavour and texture into your beer that really does drive flavour and colour. And so that, for that reason, there'll always be some malting. And I guess from us, particularly those, we use a lot of specialty malts. There's no specialty malt produced in WA, so it's all got to come across the Nullarbor. And that's a disappointing factor. There probably will be some specialty malt houses pop up in the next 12 to 18 months, and we'll see where we go from there. And I guess that's something we're thinking of. There's not that many people in Esperance, and there's only so much beer they drink, and you know, we're always going to be at a disadvantage producing beer 750 kilometres from the most isolated city in the world. So we are always in the middle of nowhere, and that's going to be always pretty tough. On average, we grow 500,000 tonne in Esperance. It might drop down this year. I still think they probably will grow 500,000 tonne in Esperance because it is looking pretty good. And I think that's probably the baseline for where barley will always be. And the reason being is because you can drop it in a high moisture stack, you can throw it down the feed, and you can get your harvest moving probably 2 weeks earlier than that wheat. So I think it'll always be there in the rotation. If it actually got paid for with a premium, it would wind back up quite quickly because there's some guys that can grow some really thumping barley crops, but the price signal is pretty much shit. And it's always been that something we were always looking at in Sepwa was why was it $20 behind Kwinana, and the reason being is because you've got 500,000 tonnes of domestic demand in Kwinana, and we don't have that in Esperance. And then you are limited to 2 or 3 traders, and once they've got their belly full, they're done. So what's left over, off you go to feed. So there is sort of a bit of a possibility there for Esperance. It is heartening to see that EQG has been putting grain out in containers, and they've been steadily growing their volumes. and that's been going really well. And I thought the logistics crisis of container availability might have really put a stop to them, but in actual fact, that was their advantage. They were able to keep things moving when Sydney and Melbourne were pushed down, and they picked up some trades then that would have normally come out of East, but they were able to satisfy, and they weren't able to deliver. So if we had $15 to $20 million, we would be probably embarking on the world's first 100% green energy malting plant. We've got the water there. We had to have a bit of a look around for water, but we've got the space. We've got wind, we've got solar, and I think we use either crop biomass or forestry residue to kiln, and we could be 100% green neutral. And when you've got a plant that was built, I think you guys were in the 80s. You've got probably, when was the sorry? Late 90s. And that is a bloody good plant by world standards. But it's still not meant to be carbon neutral. So I think if you're building up from the ground up to be carbon neutral, and also with a slightly larger site, you could have a sort of a more extensive wastewater recycling in a less energy intensive process. The membrane system you guys have got is very impressive, but I think with natural wetlands, you could actually put that through a natural process that would be much more energy passive. So those sorts of things, if you could build that from the ground up, that would be pretty exciting, and that's something that I'm sort of very interested in, but I don't have $15 or $20 million. I guess that's the one of the things we might want to think about. What's the real value of our barley industry? WA grows around about 4 million tonne. You guys all know that. $400 is. Did I cut it short? Where are we at today? 320. So I was overly optimistic. $80 premium. I'd have them knocking down the gate. So that's about 1.6 or 1.5 billion dollars. So Scotland grows about 1.3 million tonnes of barley. Funnily enough, they have a 50% strike rate to malt, similar to actually we have in Esperance. In Esperance, they cut it in half, 50-50. And a lot of that is because a lot of growers just can't be bothered with the moisture. Let's just rip it off, get going, get stuck into the wheat later on. That then supports a $6.1 billion industry of whiskey, or 4.1 billion pound. So with about 1/3 of the grain, they generate almost 4 times the revenue. So what you guys are is this sort of baseline production level. If we could layer a whole other industry on top of you, we could generate a lot more from our industry. Now that's pretty unlikely because we're in the middle of nowhere and we've got to get it back up to Asia. But even if we could put a small segment on top, that would be a good thing. And I guess that's where I've started, and that's where I've found it really interesting. And I look at the industry you guys have, and I think that's a big base to choose from. I mean, if we had, say, a malting plant in Esperance that was, I don't know, say 50,000 tonnes, which is ridiculously small. Well, actually, it's a pretty reasonable sized plant. It's pretty similar to, the Cooper's one. But basically, that would be 1 in 10 tonnes that I could choose from to put through that plant. So you could reject 9 tonnes and pick 1. That's a pretty good sorting percentages. But anyway, that's sort of something that I'm thinking about long term. Right now, we're actually feeling the pinch of people travelling a little bit more. I'm looking forward to summer because we are a real seasonal business. So I guess that I'm never far from ag because that is also seasonal. We do use a minuscule amount of barley. I think that photo of the silo you saw, that's 18 or 20 tonne. Our grower fills that up with a year, and that's us done for the year. The good thing is it's got a protein meter on the header, so we can absolutely select the grain we precisely want. But I will say there's some opportunity to add some value in the industry and grow on top of you. Particularly in WA, we have a really strong craft sector, and I hope so. I think you're going to see some craft maltings, and while they are absolutely insignificant in terms of the volume, they will sort of bend some ideas. And I had a look at Voyager over east, and that's looking good. And I look forward to sort of, adding on to what you guys do, and hopefully that goes well. Any questions? Yep.
What variety of barley are you using at the moment?
We're still on the Latrobe because it's really good grain size, and we buzz it through the cleaner, and it comes up really neat. When those contract brews come in, we've used some of the your Clearfield varieties out of the wheat belt, and the grain size is shit. Like, I really didn't like them much. So yeah, and I mean for us, because we're so small and they're a contract, I just got to adjust up the amount of grain you push down the throat of your beer. So we just go from there. It's interesting because that rationalisation process, by the sound of it, I mean, for a while there was just trying to limit them down, and now you've got down to 2 and you're like, oh shit, we've gone too far. Unfortunately, it's going to be like that forever. The pendulum's going to be swinging. But it was the accreditation process to me kind of felt a bit weird. When Hindmarsh came out and it didn't make accreditation, and it basically all just got rolled into FAQ, it cost the industry a lot of money. I think it would be a really good thing. We make beer out of rye, corn, all sorts of things. We can make beer out of pretty much anything. And the big brewers, even though they'll tell you they can't, they will. If you cut off all their supply tomorrow, they would bloody well make do, because there's no way they're going to pack up and stop, not with that amount of capital outlaid. So, but they'll never say that to you, particularly when you've got a customer like, the one starting with H. They will. I remember the quality control man saying to me, if you don't complain to your suppliers, you haven't done your job. So basically, his job was to come back to you guys as supply industry and say, this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough. And that was pretty much them. Just keep pushing you, keep pushing you. So I will say, there is opportunity to probably start to branch out away from that. And they might have cooked their goose a little bit too, because they really did push the industry a bit hard. And that's why these guys, they really, 10, like you were saying, 5 or 8 years ago, it was not a great space to be in. But now it's changing. Now all of a sudden they're like, oh, geez, we need diversity of supply. We got cooked a little bit in COVID. Well, sucked in, guys. Floyd.
Floyd from AGT. Just a quiz question. How many grains of barley in a midi or a can, in a can of Sandy Bay? Do you know?
Or Sandy Hook? Floyd, I don't know. I can tell you there's around about 75% unmalted barley in a recipe, and that'll give you around about 1,100 litres. Depending on your fermentation efficiency, it might be 1120 or 1130, and also extraction efficiency. So there's a few dials in the process that you're continually dialing up and down to make sure that you hit that consistent product in the end. So I don't know how many grains, Floyd. I'm sorry.
In Swan Brewery making beer, it's around about 1,600 kernels per export.
For an export? Yeah. Now, is Swan still using liquid sugar in that?
I don't know about what they're doing over East Coast. So.
Yep. Yeah, because it's not brewed here anymore. Yeah. Traditionally, it did have a little bit of liquid sugar in it because it ferments like buggery and it keeps it nice and light. And obviously that works well in a hot climate. You don't want to fill people up. You want to keep them knocking it back because they buy another one. And also in Australia, we had a really strong sugar industry. That's what's interesting about beer, is those cultural nuances of what you had locally, and then that influences the style of beer. And for us, we have all that grain right there on our doorstep. So it's going to, for us as Lucky Bay Brewing, it will always influence. We use that grain.
All right. Thanks, Nigel. Can you put your hands together for Nigel, please?